I'm Elaine Mihalakis, Vice President of Curatorial Affairs here at the museum. Thank you all for joining us today. As you know, the museum recently completed the landmark acquisition of a pair of magnificent memorial landscape windows by Tiffany Studios, which are now on view in the Crest Gallery. And on behalf of the entire museum, I want to thank our 220 donors to the Tiffany campaign. Without your support, we would not have been able to make this possible. These windows owe both their subtle effects and their stunning impact to Tiffany's groundbreaking innovations in glass. And it was conservator Diane Rousseau who evaluated, cleaned, and repaired this glass and the window structure, bringing the windows back to their original glory. We've been grateful to work closely with Diane from early on in this project through its fruition. Diane Rousseau is a conservator in private practice based on the Mass MoCA Museum campus in North Adams, Massachusetts. She recently completed treatment of the newly acquired Tiffany window, the Hartwell Memorial, for the Art Institute of Chicago. Her work includes conservation on windows now at the Corning Museum of Glass, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, the Worcester Art Museum, the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, and many private collections. Her studio also treats glass vessels, porcelain, and related vitreous materials. She is a professional associate of the American Institute of Conservation Object Specialty Group and a published author co-author for both ICON and ICOM CC Glass and Ceramics Group. Her postgraduate studies in 1987 at Vauxhall College in London have been supplemented by ongoing coursework in both conservation and advanced glass fusing in order to enable new techniques in loss compensation. Please join me in welcoming Diane Rousseau.
Nearly everyone here will already be familiar via the gallery display with the story of these windows' remarkable journey. I will speak to that briefly to give context for viewers in the future and in the cloud. My main focus today is to bring forward the hidden rigors, the technical challenges revealed and then resolved in the course of conservation treatment. The result in the Crest Gallery is so glorious that I want to let you stand alongside me at the removal and at the bench and share the excitement of discovery. The transition of the Thompson and Dare windows to a museum setting was an idea that grew organically. When Marcia Hyman, a member of both the Presbyterian community and of the Allentown Art Museum, brought it forward to Al Matz, shown here in the sanctuary, their head of the Preservation Committee. The church in Pottsville is an enormous multi-story edifice, and it has moved over the years toward carrying out most of its mission from the parish hall and kitchens on the lower two floors. One large space had been redecorated as a chapel. Services took place there throughout the year, with the exception of major holidays. Those were the only occasions the vaulted chancel on the top floor, filled with stained glass, was open to the public. The agreement was signed in 2017, and fundraising was begun for the purchase itself, for the reconstruction of the Crest Gallery, for assessment, removal, and conservation. While this planning phase went forward, the Tiffany windows remained at the church. These images date from 2018, taken as part of the Allentown Art Museum's initial fundraising campaign. By 2022, the museum had raised enough to take the first active steps toward the windows transition. In the course of research, Maria McWilliams, AAM's registrar, and curator Elaine Mihalakis had reached out to the Art Institute of Chicago, which had recently moved a monumental Tiffany landscape, the Hartwell Memorial Window, from a church setting into a museum display. I was part of this project from 2018 to the installation in 2021. That is me on the ladder up there. Just there, and also in the lift, but I also had the museum team on the lift. The museum team is holding the ladder. Very carefully, great care. My role was to chart the window's condition in situ, to take material samples, which is what I'm doing on the ladder, and site images, and as the basis of a report describing what the removal process would entail and what damage could be expected from removal. Finally, I had the privilege of working as a consultant and collaborator with AIC's Objects Lab. The lead conservator, Rachel Sabino, is shown at front. We worked as right and left hands for a little over 2 years. Elaine and Maria here had followed this process closely via correspondence and visits with the AIC curatorial team. When they reached out to me in the spring of 2022 to explore the possibility of my serving the same role for AAM, I was, of course, delighted. The first phase of any conservation project is a detailed examination. And in the case of stained glass, that often means working at height. I climb very deliberately and wear a fall harness where appropriate. But once I adjust to a specific lift or staging, it's a combination of intense focus and pure joy. Often I am the first person to lay hands on a window or see it up close for decades or a century. In the case of the Tiffany landscapes at Pottsville, I was able to determine that both were in sound structural condition overall, due to the majority of the composition being copper foil as opposed to lead. Tiffany Studios used both materials to their best advantage, and here the lead lines are confined to the perimeters, the straight lines under saddle bar supports. This is all lead. And the geometric design itself of the dedication panels, and some of the exterior plating. However, that still means every other visible line in the 12-foot landscapes is handmade, organic, and unique, as integral a part of the artwork as the glass, which is so often singled out for celebration. I'm going to take a short technical diversion here to more fully explain how a copper-foiled matrix is made, because this informs the technical challenges that I faced later in the project. First of all, glass is something called an amorphous solid. The molecular structure is not a regular pattern as with crystals. Thus, you can break glass in a controlled way by scoring the surface and applying downward pressure on either side of the score. In expert hands, such as those of Tiffany's craftsmen and women, these score lines could be complex curves. To add further variation to the line weight, tiny pieces could be nibbled away from the edge with a tool called grozing pliers. Adjacent pieces are then laid together and solder flowed over the whole line. While liquid, it fills every crevice, every scallop, every notch. It flows through the intersection of both pieces and forms a unique channel that locks both in place. The solder cools to a smooth, rounded line visible from top and bottom because the process is repeated when the panel is turned to the reverse. The masterful execution of this process is what makes Tiffany so valuable. Whether you're describing a lamp with 2,000 intricate tiles, or, as these blue water shadows are, a 16th inch thick and 40 inches across. Even from the lift, I was struck by the audacity of the complex cutting at this scale. Remarkably, there was only minimal damage visible in the landscapes. The surfaces were dulled by grime, especially on the exterior, but less than might be expected in a city environment. This is because Tiffany's team had taken the very wise step of including protective glazing in the original installation. The proof is this groove right here. And it's interrupted by cutouts for a second set of T-bars where the original protective glazing would have been. You can see the cutouts, the little notches. They would have been a parallel set of metal bars with glass exactly next to the window, up from 1913 and 1919 to 2009, when it had deteriorated so far that it needed to be replaced. It was, in fact, a sacrifice layer. In 2009, a local contractor brought in a laminated glass in aluminum frames, and you can see the layers of exterior paint go right from these new aluminum frames right up to the original Tiffany groove. But inboard of the groove, there's no paint at all. It's just pure wood surface. And it's a very tight contact between the perimeter leads and this wood. And that is all extremely good news. There's no visible extrusion of putty mastic sealing the window in. This is what we term a dry set, and it's the most fortunate situation for a team whose goal is to remove a window while preserving all original fabric and not damage the edges. I lifted portions of the wood molding on the interior from a ladder and got the same positive indication, only the lightest backbeat of putty mastic bedding the window. The dedication panels themselves were in somewhat ambiguous condition. They had been removed from the steel ventilator frames in 2009 and partially reletted at that time. Breaks in glass had been addressed by the addition of strap leads or cover leads, which don't fix the damage in any way but keep it from getting worse. One significant loss had happened since a star-shaped break in an inscription plate, but beyond that, and I can rarely say this, no glass was missing. The two windows were both fully original, signed Tiffany compositions, and both had a very strong likelihood of a straightforward removal from the interior, without detaching the new laminated glass at all. This was an enormous relief to both the church and the museum, and after years of anticipation, the removal was scheduled for October 2024. Because of the scale, weight, and immense value of these panels, it was clear that we needed a seasoned and collaborative removal team. I reached out to Northeast Stained Glass in Newton, New Jersey. We had worked together at another complex site and formed a collegial relationship, despite originally having been asked to bid against one another. Eric Walther and his team were the hands we needed, and they had the decks we wanted. They raised 4 layers of staging before I fully unloaded my compression packets and finished my thermos of tea. Now I will speak to these packets for a moment because they were an important element of the safety of the Tiffany panels, from removal through treatment to reinstallation at AAM. They are a variant of the handling sleeves used at the Art Institute of Chicago removal. They are made of half-inch rigid gator board shell, a structural ethafoam batten on one horizontal and one vertical, and a soft foam interior lining and Velcro tension straps around the perimeters. This combination of materials allows a conservator to handle and turn a window with reduced risk to the section or to the conservator by minimizing direct hands-on contact with lead. When the Northeast team lifted a panel free of the settings, it was in the air in 4 sets of hands for less than 5 seconds. We could hardly have asked for a more seamless removal process. The Dare window, which was based on my analysis of the plating layers, was anticipated to be the lightest, came out in a single day. The only difficulty arose when the team got as far down as the ventilation sections, which, as you recall, were reworked in 2009 by the firm that added the protective glazing. The ventilators and sidelights had been reinstalled with thick beads of silicone, sealing the stained glass to the metal sash. When Eric cut the silicone and began to ease them out, the perimeter leads fractured and the panels began delaminating. I jumped up with 3 varieties of low-tack tape. We wrapped the edges and strapped the sections together and brought them down in safety. Even though the protective laminate on the outside had not been disturbed, each stained glass panel was replaced by 1/4 inch thick clear Lexan with a 1-inch aluminum H-bars channel separating them. My final task on site was confirming the exact daylight dimensions of the Lexan. The two windows arrived at my conservation studio in North Adams, Massachusetts in October 2024. After opening the crates, I noticed an odd pattern of separation and damage in the perimeters only. As is common with Tiffany windows, the vertical perimeters were composed of two nested half-inch leads soldered together to act as one reinforced line. Despite their relatively clean condition, as compared to the horizontal leads that had been puttied into T-bars and had to be extracted from them, all three of the Thompson vertical perimeters and several of the Dare vertical perimeters had fractures straight through them at approximately the midpoint. This was not new damage from removal. The torn edges had patina and crusts and dust on them. It had obviously been in the case for quite a long time. These splits in the lead left the panels too fragile to move for documentation. I chose to photograph all the section's reverse surfaces while resting in the compression packets. Once the original condition was established, I began a program of field repairs, as I call them, even though this was in the studio, on the split perimeter leads. Cracks were bridged with short lengths of copper braid tack soldered to the lead surface. These structural splints allowed the panels to be moved into the main conservation area without changing size for documentation of the interior surfaces on a vertical light box and then onto the bench for treatment. The panels were documented and reflected in transmitted light. This is my light box setup. With a Canon EOS Mark IV fitted with a 50mm Tamron art lens. The transmitted light images were achieved by stacking 3 to 6 exposures in order to approximate the dynamic range of natural daylight. One set of transmitted light images was modified in Photoshop, removing the most egregious strap lead repairs and trimming away the documentation labeling. These edited images were transmitted to AAM and approved for a large format printer capable of making high-resolution images on translucent vinyl scrims. The United Church community was thus able to mount a version of the Dare and Thompson windows in their original locations by applying these prints to the Lexan I had taken dimensions from as the last stage of stained glass removal. The Thompson and Dare panels required individualized levels of intervention dictated by their varying fragility. The common elements in their treatment approach, which applied to all sections, are as follows. All glass surfaces were cleared of grime with a solution of 50-50% deionized water and reagent-grade alcohol on cotton buds and/or Kim wipes. Lead perimeters, which retained putty crusts and/or latex paint residue from the wood molding, were pull tested with the same 50-50% aqueous solution, infused into rolled cotton batting, and left in place for approximately 30 minutes. This tended to be enough for the crust to soften and facilitate mechanical removal. Scalpels and sharp bamboo skewers were used for the removal of these accretions. Lead and copper foil lines were cleaned with cotton buds as above, but not burnished, otherwise altered, to remove natural lead sulfate patina. Putty fragments that had dried, cracked, and migrated between layers were vacuumed away. Access to these loose deposits were achieved via removal of exterior plating and/or taking advantage of the separations between glass and lead that had occurred naturally during the removal. Solder joint fractures between copper foil lines and perimeter lead lines were patched with very fine copper match, 100 by 100 by .016 wire, cut into thin strips and soldered across the parted joint. Everything is to the aim of retaining original fabric in this Tiffany window. The more I can save, the more a Tiffany is, and we were able to save almost everything here. Fractures and lead flange surfaces and cracked lead hearts were treated in the same manner. Any mesh patches that were visible on the interior would then be burnished to match the surrounding patina using a stiff natural bristle brush. Most of the original calcium carbonate linseed oil mastic remained in place. This is the putty that was put in over 100 years ago. There's just a few gaps in it. And a conservator has the choice of picking it all out over 12 sections and replacing it, or leaving it in place and consolidating it with the same material, which will harden gradually and bond it together. I chose door number 2. The basis of the original copper wires were cut during removal and extracted from the matrix by heating them slightly with a very small soldering gun. After the completion of treatment on each panel, new 14-gauge tie wires, the same as the old, were embedded in the same locations as the originals to be twisted around the saddle bars during installation. During treatment and packing for transport, the high-relief plating layers were kept from becoming sources of planar distortion and stress by filling all gaps in the layering with 1/8 and 1/4 polyethylene foam, Ethafoam or Velara. Tiffany windows in general and the Durr and Thompson windows in specific have only one consistent surface, the interior. If a section needs to lie flat for any reason, it must be shimmed and filled with foam layers so the whole panel has support. Conservation was first carried out on the Thompson window due to the greater range of issues presented and the Durr window following. I will start at the top of the Thompson and hit what I see as the highlights of treatment. When this section separated on site, glass layers fell out of registration with their surrounding lead keams and copper channels. A process of careful glass extraction from loose and damaged matrix components without disturbing the glass that remained in place was required. All plating removed was cleaned on both surfaces with the 50/50 ethanol and water solution. Separated leads and the stacked channels of copper foil on inner layers were cleaned with 100% ethanol on very small diameter stencil brushes. These are very vulnerable to damage, and then the glass needs to fit back into them. One large opalescent piece had broken at an unknown point during the handling process. I don't know if you can see that bright line. Once the outer plating was removed, I was able to access this and tension the edges together with clear vinyl tape without removing it from the matrix at all and risking breakage to surrounding glass. This break was infused with Hextol epoxy, tinted with a small amount of zinc white pigment. Now we gotta move on. Sorry, no, it's not moving on. Move on. There we are. The glass was reintroduced into the original copper foil lines, carefully worked into position. The original perimeter leads were fully reused with 2 centimeter lead patch on the bottom right corner. The only piece that had stuck in the opening during removal was the only piece of material I had to replace. This is an after treatment photograph. One piece with imposed strap leads in a lower section and another with a large loss were removed from the matrix. Luckily, both were on perimeter edges. A heavy deposit of grime and insect frass had infiltrated through the loss, and this was first reduced by vacuuming and then swab cleaning with ethanol and water solution. The large loss was its own compensation project, which took place over several weeks, a few dots of Hextol every day. Layering of epoxy with Orisol color tints is the method I found most effective on a loss with internal streak patterns. In this piece, 20 slightly different shades were used, and I think the effect is very satisfying because the hole is still somewhere in that photograph and I cannot see it either. One simple break derived from a tie wire line at center left was infused with Hextol without removing it from the copper foil matrix. That's before, that's during, where the glue is going in, and that's after. This was T4, which was kind of an exciting layer cake of revelations. At the site, Maria and I could see that the exterior plating was unusually deep. It approached 1 inch high from the surface of the base layer glass. The composition includes water running below and over rocks, and this is executed in the most naturalistic way. A copper-foiled rock layer is embedded between the dark gray water shadows on the outside and the white foam layer on the inside. And so the rock is completely invisible in reflected light. It has to be transmitted light for you to see that rock at all. Isn't that extraordinary?
Yeah.
I mean, Tiffany just was like, well, if I have 5 layers, I'm going to put the rocks between one water and another set of water. Okay. Remarkable. One very large piece of exterior plating was seen to have a blind crack, meaning it goes most of the way into the fabric of the glass and then stops. During the site survey in 2022, we saw this. And the surface is an important piece because that surface had been acid etched to create the appearance of ripples on the outermost surface. But when I removed it for cleaning, it was revealed that they were not done creating ripples on the outermost surface. There was other intentional opacity added to the glass, extending well down through the layering. Brush strokes of applied white pigment placed to emphasize the areas of ripples on the exterior are visible on both surfaces of the outer layer and also the layer below that. Based on its appearance under magnification, this is likely to be zinc white or another fine white powder pigment applied in an oil medium. So when you go back up and look, you'd best appreciate those ripples because they were stacking them in there. The large gray plate with the blind crack was bonded with clear Hextol epoxy infused in very small dots from a 30-gauge needle in order to minimize migration into the acid-etched pattern. The crack did not extend or break further during handling, so it can be assumed stable and successful treatment. This is the dark. The dark lines are air. So this is the Hextol epoxy wicking its way into the crack, and then little by little it fills the crack until anything left is just an air bubble, and you are stuck with that. But if it's a good small needle, you could get almost the whole crack. Even a blind crack will be possible to fix. Two additional breaks in dark blue mottled glass were found because they've been concealed by these short strap legs. These are not Tiffany, they do not belong here. I infused them with B72. It's a different adhesive in acetone. It's much more reversible, and you can tint it just as with Hextol with Kremer pigments, zinc white, whatever you want it to be. Because they weren't accessible for removal. The edges weren't accessible for cleaning due to the placement and shape. So I used a more reversible resin so that if anyone in the future wants to do a better job, they can remove my lines of B72 resin and replace them with whatever is better in the future. It's acetone will dissolve it, so it's a reversible choice. T5. This panel is the base of the landscape, the Thompson landscape, and it was one of the most heavily soiled and damaged. At the bottom edge, it is also 5 layers deep. The layers don't fully align, and the interior two are copper foiled together on all these complex interior curves. Unhappily, a pattern of dark circular spots on the site, I thought this was insect infestation, was trapped between the waves of pale blue streaky glass. At this point, my engineering genes rose to the occasion. In all lighting conditions, these spots were visible, and I knew they would be unacceptable in a gallery setting. So I came up with maybe a new invention. To me, it's new. I opened up the section from the perimeter channel and slipped in a strip of moistened balsa wood. The idea was to find something stiff enough to work into the opening and absorbent enough to carry grime back out. The first trial did remove some grime, but the wood broke as I was drawing it out. I then sourced a length of thin, flexible brass strip, 0.020 by 0.375, and abraded it with a Dremel metal cutting wheel to make it thinner still. A crosshatch pattern and one central groove was etched into the surfaces as a final preparation step. This I called the magic wand. It was wrapped in thin white cotton fabric, wetted with 50% alcohol and water solution, and slipped into between the layers of glass from an open edge. Using extreme care, it was possible to slide this tool inward until it swept over the stain pattern. More 50/50 ethanol solution was injected via syringe, and the capillary action drew the grime-infused liquid back onto the tool surface, after which it was quickly withdrawn. For the longer drip pattern, I was even able to wrap the tool with a very fine white cloth. That's what I said. To me, this looks biological. But can you see how black? Can you see the grime that's being taken off from between the layers? The same section also presented a joining challenge requiring more engineering and a bit of yoga. Two large breaks in a multicolored streaky piece were very, very visible. Both these joints were open and or dirty. One seam had been concealed by a strap lead, and I was grateful to find minimal edge chipping when I took the strap off. But the piece is oddly configured and was locked into its copper foil lines. I could lift free only a portion. Two large fragments were removed and joined with opacified hextile. The streak patterns layered through this particular piece are very complex. The interior, core, and exterior of the glass are all different colors. There is no plating. This is the only large single-layer piece in the entire landscape. Since Northrop, the artist, may well have selected it herself to represent the riverbank, it seemed appropriate to take more than usual pains to color match these joints. The panel was being treated on a support of clear Lexan. This was pulled out from the bench far enough so that light could be transmitted from both above and below. I rigged a second small light panel and fitted myself into the space below the panel to check the accuracy of the tinted hextile while it was still liquid. I was able, therefore, to modify the epoxy color and opacity dropped from above while viewing from below. For the Thompson window overall, patching with copper foil mesh was carried out on all lead perimeters. The high relief plating lead enclosing layer 5 and the connection points to the central horizontal leads tended to be fractured as well. I patched the hearts of any leads I took off the panel, as well as the top and bottom flanges to increase structural integrity before the bronze frame could be introduced. This is the bottom of the Thompson window. The sidelight sections and the ventilator section were almost fully disassembled because they had been through so much. Removal of opaque white plating revealed extensive coal dust and insect infiltration. There was almost a water line of putty deposits, biological growth, and just general grime. Where practical, the glass was kept together, the fillet borders were kept together and treated as one discrete unit, and cleaning took place in a polyethylene photo-developing tray with Orvis detergent and tap water. This is another coal dust, so extreme, but not adhered at all. It's such a joy to remove. The side lights and central sections had numerous interruptive strap leads in addition to the grime deposits. And there were several fresh breaks in the plating as well. All broken pieces were removed from the lead and treated with Hextile NYL1, treated with Orsol dye to match the pale blue, and zinc white pigment to match the opacity. Reassembly threw me a bit of a curve because due to the reworking in 2009, the leads around the perimeter and the horizontals were too damaged to be retained and/or were not original at all. I was able to order new lead at almost the last minute of exactly the right dimensions, and I used less than 3 lengths out of the box. Around the panel edges, on 2 sides of a fillet border through the center, that would be this one and this one, and on the exterior plating. So nearly all of this new material is not visible to the viewer. All but one line is hidden by the vent frame or by the saddle bars. Conservators try to preserve original fabric, and what I want visitors to the gallery is to see Tiffany rather than Diane Rousseau, and it is all Tiffany aside from one single line. Having worked my way down the Thompson window now and met its many challenges, I was ready to start at the top of the Dare panels. Initially, this was almost a rest break. D1 and D2 required only surface cleaning and no other intervention outside the general conservation outline, getting new wires and so forth. These are before images, and these are after images. Barely anything to do. In the panel below, the work became more interesting again. The lights and shades of this central water passage are composed of delicately etched flashed glass. This is clear glass with a very thin layer of color on it, and it tends to be extremely thin because it's got to be acided away in order to get the pattern the artists want. It's the focal point of the composition, and even at the initial assessment we could see drip patterns that were disfiguring. They were grime between the layers. I believe that, like the spot patterns on section T5, this derives from atmospheric moisture circulating around and through the panel, carrying coal dust particulate with it until the droplets condensed and trailed downward. But again, the grime is trapped. This outer plate could be removed, but it would do no good because the drops are between 2 inner layers, this one and the one behind it, and they are foiled together and locked in by their shape. Acid etched pieces in general are so fragile that I found it an unacceptable risk to even think about extracting one from the foil lines that are so rigid. So I brought out the magic wand from my toolkit and was successful in sweeping through the drip patterns until they were quite significantly reduced. These are strap lead repairs done with epoxy resin that gets tinted to the right color. This is a large foliage piece made of blue ring model glass, and it had 2 prominent strap leads that Tiffany did not design in. This one is one, and this is the other. This is actually a Tiffany line. Because of the configuration of the piece, I could not extract it without cutting and melting and otherwise intervening on the foil. So I didn't. I lifted out only the smaller fragment on the perimeter. This is the perimeter of the window, and did all the cleaning on that, and then cleaned the larger fragment while still in place. The piece was taped together laterally and infused with tinted Hextol, the result is much better than the 1/4-inch line that is imposed across those bushes. As with the Thompson panels, all perimeter leads were patched with copper mesh and set back in place. On this particular occasion, I had the rare necessity to restore a foil line. Most of the foil lines came through fine. 120 years, no problem. But I cut new copper foil to a strip of matching width and adhered it to the original line. It was soldered into place and burnished to match the tone of the surrounding matrix. For the next section down, D4, minimal intervention was required except for this one long, oddly configured 40-inch blue piece I keep talking about. It's broken right here, and so I had to lift it from the leads to join with Hextol. The unusual length of the piece combined with the short break meant it had to be propped vertically in basically a sandbox with weights at the bottom, and then clamped with Berna clamps. To to get acceptable alignment for the join. So it was like a little glass forest. The very bottom of the dare window is D5, and this full width, this is the 56-inch width exterior plating. You can see the grime on the interior surface as well as the exterior. And once my assistant and I had removed these very long pieces, because it took 2 weeks to do it, I had access to the reverse of the base layer composition, which was absolutely contaminated with black soiling coal dust that had migrated in over more than 100 years through all the perimeter edges. Cleaning went forward with 50% ethanol solution on Kim wipes, since cotton buds tend to catch on the sharp edges of the exterior copper foil in this particular passage specifically, and they leave fibers behind, so cotton would not have worked. The process goes forward until the Kim wipes came away with no visible soiling. That's when you know you're done. It's a long but satisfying progression. For D6, both sidelight sections and the central ventilator section were partially disassembled. Heavy deposits of old putty fragments were visible and through the transparent green glass of the exterior plating. The central section was disassembled until all the border pieces were accessible for cleaning and joining. This particular section was also heavily disfigured by strap leads and the major loss in the clear area of the upper inscription. The strap leads, I'm grateful to report, covered breaks with no more than minor shelling, so they were relatively simple to bond. All of those extraneous lines were like, good news, I can just take them off and fill what they didn't do in 2009. But the severe loss required several stages of Hextile filling layered into a clear tape substrate and with wax dams along the loss edges. I spent a number of days laying in clear drops through a 32-inch diabetic needle with my head on a tilt to register whether the surface of the fill was flat. You see those are that's my check. That's the overhead lights. And once I get a straight line in the fill, then I know I'm done filling. The missing fragments of the lettering itself, which are deep violet flashed glass, were filled with a layer of intensely tinted Hextile, Orisol Violet RN, and Black CN. Bronze framing. 5/16 by 5/8 by 3/32 U-channel bronze was selected by AAM and myself for a handling frame. The museum anticipates that these Tiffany windows will be moved into a new building within the next decade. The fact that the outer perimeter leads were liable to be damaged upon removal from the church setting and potentially could shed particulate lead from both fragile and putty compromised outer surfaces contributed to the decision to enclose them in bronze so that I would not be handing anyone in the future the necessity of having their hands cut with abraded lead. And at this point in the treatment, a question that had arisen on the first inspection was answered as I was framing. All of the Thompson sections and 3 of the Dare sections had these splits across the vertical perimeter leads, and they seemed somehow related to the installation. There were tack holes through the lead adjacent at varying distances, but not on them, and so the connection had not been clear. Now, as I put a straight edge against each upper and lower perimeter to frame them, it became apparent that nearly all the sections' horizontal edges had a distortion pattern. They had dropped from an eighth to as much as a quarter from the center. A curve slight enough to be barely detectable from the pew. My reconstruction of the cause is that each T-bar had originally been set a bit taller than the section height to allow the section to swing into place. The sections were secured to the wood frame with long steel tacks, as is traditional, which produced the round holes in the lead. And these tacks and the saddle bars and the tie wires took most of the panel weights initially. But over a century, the centers of the sections came downward, and the lead, which was the only thing that could give distorted and on the uppers and lowers, and fractured on the sides. The original T-bars had been retained and conserved at this point and were intended for use in the new display. The dimensions of the bronze chosen fit neatly into the channel of the T. My plan had been to reduce the outside flange of the horizontal perimeter leads, a surface which would be hidden by the T-bars and damaged by the extraction by the 3/32 needed to compensate for the thickness of the bronze. It became apparent, however, that the lead perimeters now needed to be planed with priority for squaring them up, so that the installation would not be made problematic by reproducing the original nested curves. Some conserved sections were more square and some were less square. I chose to straighten those with detectable distortion by planing the center of the lower lead channel flange, which had dropped, and the corners of the upper lead channel, which were now too high. This successfully brought the panels back to consistent rectangles. All lead visible to the viewer was preserved. The vertical perimeters had always had this kind of reveal, and the uppers and lowers had always been hidden, so I wasn't changing anything that you would have seen at the church. At the removal in 2024, the Tiffany era T-bars, saddle bars, and ventilator frames, the metal structure, they were packed and transported separately from the windows. We could not predict what shape they would be in, and we did have the hope that at least some of this original fabric could be used in the new display. The bars were encrusted with putty and several generations of paint. The vent frames had the same accumulations and just masses of silicone caulk and foam shimming. But upon examination at the studio, all these metal components proved to be sound, straight, completely free of corrosion. Not rusted at all. The material was revealed to be galvanized steel. So the paint layers and putty crust were removed via very low pressure sandblasting, and trials carried out with a range of chemical patinas. After consultation with the museum team, a black tannic acid finish was selected. This was mixed according to the established Canadian Conservation Institute recipe and protocol, and applied to the bars by Adam Nesbitt, my right hand, and a skilled conservator in his own right of metals and related objects. A surface coating of black carbon-infused wax by Sculpt Nouveau and clear Renaissance microcrystalline wax helped even out any differences in color tone. Once framed, the Thompson and Dare panels were photo-documented again after treatment and checked while on the light box for any damages I missed while doing bench work. Creases in the surface of Tiffany glass can pass as cracks and vice versa. A few such were found and treated with resin chosen according to their degree of trapped soiling. If the edges appeared dark, I used B72, which is reversible, even though it was slightly tinted white. And if the edges appeared clean, I injected Hextol. Transport back to AAM was carried out by Atelier 4, and installation into the new gallery took place on March 19, 2025, with the assistance of the Northeast Stained Glass team and the Allentown Art Museum team. I was following the progress remotely because of the precision in construction of the bronze frames and the new wood sash. My physical presence wasn't needed. Jim's team sent me this first image, and Maria the second, and the word they both used before the lights were even turned on was flawless. So the first time I've seen the Dare and Thompson window treatment in person was yesterday. The dozens of images on social media of visitors awestruck by the display gave me a hint of the impact, but I am beyond thrilled. The dynamic lighting system provided by Illuminated Integration in Harrison, Pennsylvania, shows the artwork to immense advantage, displaying sunrise, sunset, and reflected light. You might remember these early images from the church. And although the light there is natural, the shadows cast by the laminated glass frames, these dark bars, were almost impossible to ignore for me. The lighting conditions would be good at the church for a few short hours, and then once the sun came out, you had extra lines added to the window just because of the protective glazing. Here we have sunrise, a clear day, sunset, all uncorrupted by blocky shadows or any kind of bad weather. I want to offer my thanks to Maria, Elaine, and Steve for their flawless responsiveness whenever I needed them, and their willingness to involve me in only 3 Zoom meetings over 6 months. I was allowed to keep my loupe on, focused on my hexel joining, while the Crest Gallery was being demolished and reconstructed, and the lighting system sourced and designed, and countless other logistical minefields. I'd like to call out Lindsay Parrott, whose leadership at the Neustadt Museum has contributed to the renewed spotlight on Tiffany and his colleagues. I want to thank Adam, my right hand, as I said, Period Lighting, who helped bend the 45-inch curves in the bronze frame, Deerfield Machining, who allowed me to mill down the leg lengths of the bronze when it turned out some of them weren't fit the glass that we had. The whole project felt blessed. I had no material delays, I had no tariff problems. Everything I wanted showed up on time. The job just feels absolutely blessed, and I thank all of you for your contributions and your time listening to me today.